Today is April 8th, Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum starts its operation today. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov, and today we will be talking about a very important topic. We will be talking about the Ukrainian children and their return. We will be talking about the crimes committed by Russian Federation and inevitable punishment for those crimes. We will be talking with Mykola Kuleba, founder of Save Ukraine, commissioner of the President of Ukraine for Children's Rights in 2014-2021. Also joining us will be qualified lawyers, very experienced lawyers, Kateryna Rashevska, legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights, and Ievgeniia Kapalkina, lawyer at Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group. Before I start talking, I want to show you a small video.
Ви мами, які їдуть за своїми дітьми, це ваше просто святе право. Це буде нелегко, нелегкий буде шлях повернення вашої дитини, це все буде, можливо, стресово, тому що будете перебувати деякий час в країні агресора, але що ви сильні і ви точно зробите все, що від вас залежить, і дітки скоро будуть тут у нас.
І я не знаю, що з Бренда в голову.
Я її сильно. Там вже попрацювала і поліція, і всі докази і свідчення вони вже дали, але чомусь їх не відпускають. Дуже довго немає, тому ми всі в напрузі чекаємо.
Million Ukrainian children now live in Russian Federation or in occupied territories.
I have to add that here in the first row we have the children with whom you will be able to talk later. Well, first I will give the microphone to Mr. Mykola about to tell us about the legal assessment, about the process of return. Please, glory to Ukraine. Good afternoon. Thanks for everybody who is attending our press conference. I see a lot of familiar faces. Those who was with us during our rescue missions, those who were documenting the evidences of the war crimes, because every life of every children, all the children whom we returned or who are still staying in Russian Federation are the evidences of the war crimes committed by Russian Federation. I want to thank the children because they are the real heroes. They are those for the sake of whom we do what we do. I want to thank all my colleagues, the partners. There are also representatives of the Security Service of Ukraine, here with us, who started documenting the war crimes with us from the very first day of our mission, who questioned the children. I also see a lot of partners, organizations who also were supporting us on our mission. Today this press conference is to tell in detail how it is happening, how many children were affected by this problem. Those are the questions that we are being asked all the time, how we rescue the children. But first, a couple of words about Save Ukraine. It's the rescue network, and our main activity is to save the children and their families from war. We rescued more than 90,000 people from the areas of active warfare. We have 12 rescue teams and 10 hubs and a network of centers working in the areas of active warfare. After we rescue the people from the areas of active battles, we have centers to bring them to provide the bulletin for them. Further on, we will have a press conference on how we renew the lives of thousands of Ukrainians. But today we want to talk more about the war crimes, how they are being committed, and how Russia purposefully was planning that and was exercising their plans, and how they continue doing it. On the way to Kyiv now are 31 children. You've seen the video about our 4th rescue mission where we rescued 18 children. Now almost over is the 5th rescue mission, and 31 child in 3 or 4 hours will be arriving in the city of Kyiv. It was special not only due to the number of kids that we rescued, but also due to complications we experienced, because unfortunately a grandmother who had to pick up 2 children died. She passed away during this rescue mission. We don't want to talk a lot about this fact. Now we have to repatriate her body to Ukraine, and we have to return the children that she had to pick up. This is why we returned only 31 child and not 33 as we were going to. Another thing, we had a lot of interrogations by FSB, and with every mission the number of families going through those tribulations increased. Now it's been more than 14 hours of interrogations going on and on, so it's not surprising the heart of the grandmothers has stopped, because it's difficult to imagine what do those families experience after you have to prove why are you going to take your child away from Russian imprisonment and not to leave them there without regardless any interrogations by the Russians. So talking about the scale of this tragedy, you can see, according to the studies of the Yale University, you can see this figure in the portal Children of War. That's 19,500 people, 19,500 children that were identified since the beginning of the full-scale aggression, and we're trying to find ways to get them back to Ukraine. You may also hear about the impressive numbers that I keep reiterating. 1.5 million Ukrainian children who ended up in Russia or in occupied territories after the year 2014. It's 20%, almost 20% of children's population. It's Crimea, Donbass, the occupied territories of other regions of Ukraine, and those are the children who are hostages. They are prisoners. We are accustomed to hearing about prisoners of war, but those are the children who stay in Russian imprisonment, and unfortunately they cannot come back to Ukraine today due to a number of reasons. And I would like to say now that after our return became of a mass nature, Russians got agitated, specifically after the International Criminal Court issued the arrest warrant for Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, so they've understood that every child coming back is the evidence of their crimes. So they held a press conference. I think that 2 days ago you were all witnessing that press conference. At that very same moment that legal representatives and the parents of the children arrived to the camp to take their children, they were not allowed in that venue. They were kept behind the fence and they were allowed into the venue one by one. There was a facility with the cameras installed, and the Russians were pressing on the parents before their children were picked up, so that their parents thank Russia in front of the cameras to have Russia have had set their children. The children who returned during our rescue mission, they will tell you today how they were going to return them and what was going on to them. I will save a little bit of your time and I will not talk to them, but I would like you to listen to them. They were telling their story a couple of times already, so it's interesting to hear what was going on to them and how they ended up there. And since I mentioned that press conference with the journalists in Russia, I would like to draw your attention to the screen so you check out what are the main narratives used by Russia to debunk our accusations of the war crimes. Since February 2022, Russian regions accepted more than 5 million refugees from Donbass and other Ukrainian republics. More than 700,000 of them are children. They all came to us upon request of the heads of DPR and LPR. We were addressed by the authorities of those republics to accept those civilians in our territory. In our attitude to the children, we are based on the human attitude. We took control over the situation of the return of the children who were forwarded to recreation to the Republic of Crimea. We don't force anybody to come, and about 2,500, more than 2,000 children were forwarded to the recreation camps, and our task was to sort out what is the specific kind of help we can provide to reunite the families. Now we're taking a large group of children from Crimea, and there will be only 18 children left in the Krasnodar region. All the children come to the camps upon the consent of their parents, and they come back home right after the end of the shift. Our state language is Russian, and obviously the main language they will learn is Russian language. I cannot say everything is smooth, everything goes without complications. It's difficult to react when your child runs around the smaller children and chasing them and saying we're gonna eat the little Moskal, but it's all a result of propaganda that was imposed in Mariupol. Well, now this child started calling me mother. Russia does not recognize the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court, and their resolution for us is nil. We continue working, but as to the list of children, I'm curious what lists are actually discussed always. Ukraine keeps saying we deported, we kidnapped, we tortured those children. There was no single formal address to us. Give us the list of parents who are looking for their kids. What lists are you talking about? What should I submit to whom? Whom should I talk to? The aggressors, the rapers? When I get those lists and when I hand over those children to Ukraine, this is when you can bring me to liability, because now we protect those children. They are about to undergo undergo military and patriotic training in different regions of Russia with serious trainers. The first shift that was going on in Chechnya, we understand the national peculiarities, the strong man, the special accent was not brought over the military aspect. We were in touch with the University of Special Forces, one of the most interesting, so we just demonstrate that beauty that exists in Chechnya. It was not only for the children from new regions. If I'm not mistaken, it was about 30 of them from Donetsk People's Republic and 20 from LPR. Well, in our regions there are special schools, but in the new regions there are no such educational training institutions, and the authorities of the republics addressed us to support us in educating and rehabilitation of such teenagers. The president supported this idea, and in September more than 1,000 teenagers who have some complications, they will undergo those shifts that will help them in future, I'm sure. Well, look, everything she said is the evidences for the International Criminal Court, and I would like her to talk more and more. Let her have those press conferences daily, because they are all the evidences of the war crimes, starting with the fact that she says that it's Donetsk and Luhansk regions, or DPR, LPR, they addressed Russia with their request to accept those children. But what is their relation to Kherson, Kharkiv regions? Those children who were deported to Crimea or to Russian Federation, we are being called aggressor in her speech, and this is what they tell the kids. I was talking to a child, one of that last group that we've picked up. They say that they saved us. That was Ukrainian army performing the offensive actions. They were killing civilians. How many children, how many adults they killed and imprisoned. This is when we start talking about humanity. When she talks about humanity, we have to continue talking about that. What humanity can be discussed in this context by the people who invaded Ukraine and who killed the civil population, and the consent of the parents to hand over the children to the recreation camps. I think we're having a presentation here. Yeah, let's put their presentation of the screen. So yeah, talking about humanity, how many children were killed, how many children were injured, how many children are hostages in Russian Federation, how many were forced to leave their homes. Millions of children, Ukrainian children. According to my calculations, 60% of the children since the beginning of the full-scale aggression were forced to leave their homes. It's more than half of all the children of Ukraine who were forced to flee from war. As I mentioned, 20% of the children who starting from the 2014 live under the control of the occupier, either in Russia or in occupied territories, and 30% more who live in other countries, who were forced to run away from the war to other countries. As to the parents' consent to the recreation camps, let's just imagine what are the circumstances under which the parents were forced to give their consent to hand over their children to those recreation camps in Crimea or Russia. Imagine they lived under the control of the occupiers. It's when the collaborationists were pressing on them. The Russians first hired the collaborationists, and the first children to go to Russia or Crimea were the children of collaborationists. So those collaborationists said, like, look, our children went there, why don't you want to send your kids over there? And many parents told us about the pressure on them to send their children to recreation camps or send them to the school where Russian education program was implemented. There are tons of Russian books over there. I've seen it in occupied territories or in liberated territories. All the books were printed in Moscow, and the libraries were filled with those books, and children had to study based on those books and in those recreation camps too. Vitaly, if you can you please tell us what exactly was going on in that camp? How many months have you spent there? Can you please stand up and tell all the audience? Maybe someone would ask you something. How long have you spent in that camp and what was going on there? I was in that camp half a year. There was a first camp, The Dream. It was more or less normal there. But further on, we were moved to another camp. There was a barbed wire there. We thought we would be put in there, but then we were told, like, let's go out, you're gonna spend a couple of weeks over there. Well, and I thought, all right, let it be 1 week, 2 weeks, but not more than that. Then we were brought to the rooms, and there was no rug, no linoleum on the floor, just a cement floor. And they told us, this is your room. There was a bunk without linens. No one brought us any linens. We were waiting like for 2 hours. We went to the director of the camp and we asked, are we gonna have any linens? And they say, we're not obliged to give you anything. You are Ukrainian kids and we don't know why you ended up there. You had to take your linens with you. We were kind of shocked. And the janitor came up to us and she says, what's going on? And we said, they don't want to give us any linens. And she said, yeah, I was brought here to work too. I am being provided with meals here, but they gave me no linens either. So the janitor gave us the linens. Then the director started yelling at the janitor, why have you given them those linens? So the director went to our room and took those linens from us. So we had to sleep without them. Then we were told to go to the messing hall and we were fed some porridge without salt or sugar. It was cold. We were given no tea, anything. They told us, you should have taken the food with you. We said we were coming to the recreation camp, we were expecting to be fed here, have some entertainment. So this is how we spent those 2 weeks in there. Every evening they had this session of the conversations about the important things. They were telling us that Ukraine pushed you out of your country, of Ukraine. Zelensky is a drug addict, and in Ukraine you're going to be put in a cellar, you're going to be punished. We were not allowed to call our parents. We didn't know that the right bank of Kherson region was liberated. So we thought we will get some information about Ukraine. So anyway, they were treating us as animals. They were putting us in a separate facility. For example, children from Luhansk, they had a different dining facility and a different billeting facility. So we were threatened that they would kill us, they would cut us down. In the night, then Astahov gathered us and he started telling us that we are not in the recreation camp, but we were evacuated from Kherson because Ukraine shells Kherson. That we were refused, our parents refused us, they abdicated us, that they have relevant paperwork that confirms that nobody needs us anymore. Vitaly, was it in your camp when the Russian anthem was playing for 4 or 5 hours and we were told we had to learn it? Whoever doesn't sing the Russian anthem would get hit, and evicted or otherwise. Thank you, Vitaly. Well, imagine you have to listen to Russian anthem for 4 or 5 hours day by day. So it's a psychological violence. It's one of the types of violence they exercised over the children. But Artem, I wanted to have you meet Artem. Artem, please tell us how you ended up where you actually ended up. What were the circumstances? I went, please, can you please turn around to face the audience? Well, I went to pick up my diploma. We're talking about Kharkiv region here, yes. On the next day, we were provided meals at school. The military came and they started saying that like, we're evacuating you to a safer area so that you don't get injured, so you don't get threatened with everything. They put us on a military truck, Ural, and we were brought to Svatove. Over there everything was kind of normal. Further on we were taken away to Russian territory. We came to Starobelsk. We were staying there for a little while. We were given meals there. And then we were brought to Lugansk, where we were billeted. We were attending school there, studying there. And on the very next day we were put in school that we were attending. And then they started telling us that Ukraine is bad, Ukraine cannot do anything about you. Then they started saying like, we're evacuating you after that you will be safe there, and in a week someone will come to pick you up from there. After a week no one came to pick us up, and we were kind of threatened there, intimidated. They punished us for just no reason. We were forced to unload the humanitarian aid. They were intimidating us that they would put us in a mental facility. Well, they were forcing us to clean the territory, or they said they would give us, hand us over for adoption to foster families. They put us in the rooms where there were no bunks, just the mattresses without pillows. We were sleeping on the floor on those mattresses, covering ourselves with the jackets. We were eating some cereal without salt or anything, with just some canned meat. And then they were forcing us to sing the Russian anthem. They forced us to stand up at the Russian anthem sounds. No one actually reacted. None of us reacted to this. No one was standing up, but they kept threatening us on and on. Well, please, thank you, Artem. Please take your seat. There were many evidences from the children about forcing them to comply with the Russian regime, to sing their songs, not express themselves as Ukrainians in no way. And that was prohibited, and there was punishment for that. What Artem told you, like every day they were eating the canned food and the bread. This is what the military gave them, the same thing that they were eating. But those children, they were isolated. All the children that we were returning, they were saying the same thing. No one was trying to find their parents. Is the crime. Not that Maria Lvova-Belova is telling that let us give us some lists, or let them give us some lists. They had to comply with their obligations according to the international humanitarian law. They had to identify those children and submit the relevant lists to the Red Cross, so that Ukraine could find their parents. We were finding their parents by ourselves, because in some cases the children were changed their place of temporary residence for 5 times within those 5 months. They were living with cockroaches and rats. This is what they told. The billeted conditions were unacceptable. Absolutely, there were many evidences of what was going on to those children. Nastya, I will give you the microphone a little bit later, but then let's go further. So who's taking the microphone? Thank you for this opportunity to express myself on this platform. As the international law lawyer, I would like to concentrate on violations of international humanitarian law, since the subject of today's press conference is deportation of the children, so I will restrict myself to only this category. We all understand that both in international law and national law, the child is the human being all the way up to the age of 18 years. Talking about deportation, when we talk about deportation, we talk about the children below 18 years. What's important is that international humanitarian law is applied during the armed conflict which exists in Ukraine since 2014. A part of Ukrainian territory is under control of Russian Federation, and respectively Russian Federation is obliged to be responsible for all actions and activities they exercise in those territories. If we're talking about deportation and relocation of the children, the international humanitarian law, specifically Geneva Conventions, restrict the occupier state, the state that controls the territory not only of Ukraine, to relocate the children to the occupied territories or to its territory. The children, if the children are not the citizens of that state, the only exclusion according to Geneva Conventions that allows relocation of the children is the evacuation. However, the evacuation can be exercised only in 2 cases. When it's the matter of security, when the security situation requires so in some territory, or there are other military activities that require the civilian population not to be present in certain area. But in compliance with the international humanitarian law, evacuation should be complied, or the country which exercises evacuation should comply with the guarantees envisaged by the international humanitarian law, the guarantees for the children. So there are regulations which require the occupier state to comply with those regulations. It's related mostly to the matter of evacuation within certain territory. It cannot contemplate relocation of people to other country, save for the cases when the occupied territory cannot be maximum secured. But as we see in Ukraine, Russia does not comply with any of those principles, and under the cover camouflage of evacuation for humanitarian purposes, they try to just deport the children to Russian Federation, where they commit all those actions to them that we evidence now, that our children are now mentioning, the influence on the conscience of children, the influence on their identity, their separation from their families, the restriction of their communication with their parents. So this is the violation of their rights according to international law, international humanitarian law. And what's important to document in this regard is that when there is investigation of those facts of deportation and forced relocation going on, we have to investigate any specific case, whether there is violation of international humanitarian law. Is it true that those relocation facts, they have the indicators of grand war crimes which are contemplated by the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court and International Humanitarian Law, and based on that investigation we have to come to conclusion whether it's a humanitarian mission related to the necessity of evacuation to the safer areas, or it's a war crime. But another emphasis is that evacuation has a temporary nature, and it has to provide the right of the children after the security situation is complied with in the territory they were taken away, so that they can get back and reunite with their families. Maybe I omitted something, but this is how it's written in Geneva Convention. Maybe Kateryna may add something. What is necessary to draw everybody's attention to is the violation of those regulations. The existence of the conflict in territory, it created prerequisites for those incidents related to relocation of the children. It was all done by Russian Federation, as Mr. Kuleba mentioned. In case there would be no this situation in Ukraine, those facts with deportation of the children could not have happened. What can we say about the children? They are the victims of such crimes, and they end up under influence, both physical and psychological. We see that what's happening is the forced relocation of the children to Russian Federation upon certain under certain covers, like recreation, with conditional guarantees that they would be provided with everything necessary for life, billeting, meals. But the beautiful picture that they're telling about their kids or their families turns out to be not true at all, absolutely. So the important thing is what the investigation authorities and the investigators of the International Criminal Court face here in Ukraine is the fact of the crimes, what crimes were exactly committed. And as to the issue of the war arrest orders by the International Criminal Court, the court is now in position that for the time being the fact of deportation and forced relocation of the children is legally classified as a war crime, as one of the grand war crimes. But it's not yet a final qualification of this crime, because Russia further commits the same actions, and the evidences show that those crimes may be requalified as other grand crimes which have higher threshold of evidence. The crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity. My colleague may add more about the crime of genocide because it's her main profile and her position for proving such facts. Our organization for the time being relies on the fact that on the national level the qualification may be as a war crime or crime of genocide, and now the qualification by the ICC is as of war crimes. Just in brief, Mr. Mykola, and then we'll proceed to Ms. Kateryna. Thank you, Ms. Ievgeniia. I would like to proceed to Ms. Kateryna, but I want to describe the case of one example of one child. It's a 14-year-old boy who lived in Leningrad region, and his mother passed away. Russian authorities took him to a foster family, into Russian foster family. Last year, the foster parent, the foster father, was fighting with Ukraine. He was in the ranks of Russian army, So the foster mother, she hated that boy. She was torturing him. The social services, they knew about it, and he said he was attending Russian school where he was tortured just for being a Ukrainian child. He was forced together with all the children. This is how it's normal in Russia. He was forced to write the letters of appreciation to Russian military. He was forced to write the letters of appreciation for killing Ukrainians. So when his grandmother found out about the situation, she went there to pick him up, to take him away to Ukraine. And social services in Russia, they said that you can only do this, you can only take this child back to Ukraine only by accepting the Russian citizenship and staying in Russia. So she let the grandmother pick up the boy and live there nearby that family. After she signed the certificate for non-living Russian Federation, so we helped that grandmother to flee Russian Federation. Now they're in Ukraine, and they are the witnesses of such war crimes. And this boy, he clearly tells about the bullying of Ukrainian children in Russian schools and what's going on inside Russia. He also told us about one boy who was studying in the same school. He was from Mariupol, and his parents were killed too, and he was in a foster family too. But that boy, he evidenced that was a family of alcohol abusers, and the boy was coming to school always hungry. And another girl, we returned from a shelter, from a camp in Crimea. She said she was offered to go to a foster family from Ussurisk. The family came there and they already had 10 children from Ukraine. She refused to go to that family because she knew we were about to come pick her up. But instead that family got another 8 children from that shelter. It's 18 children in total. Another boy that we returned from a foster family, within 2 weeks in the foster family, he knew, and the services knew he was in the camp. And we were carrying his sister to pick him up. So they put him in that foster family, and in 2 weeks after his sister came, he said, "I don't want to go back to Ukraine." And he was asked, "Why don't you want to go back to Ukraine?" He said, I'm being beaten there, and this is what my foster parents told me. I would get some financial aid here, I will get Russian citizenship, I will enter professional school, and for coming back to Ukraine I would most likely be killed for staying in that foster family. So we had to convince him that this is not true. We got him back to Ukraine, and now he is the witness of those crimes. He provides evidences to us, and we have many stories that confirm all of what we're telling you. So Miss Kateryna can tell you more about the war crimes and about this nice lady on the screen. So I would like to give a couple of comments about what my colleagues said about handing over the children to the families with the military, who said they have their daughters working as nurses in the hospitals, or their sons are in this special military operation. So those lines of children Maria Lvova Belova tells us about, they only exist in their sick fantasies. Really, there are the lists of the resource families, so-called. Those are the families that have already Ukrainian kids adopted, in order not to lose any advantages, like any social payments. Please take more Ukrainian kids, there are no restrictions. And then Maria Lvova Belova says they do everything possible to reunite the families. So within this press conference, and after her address, in in the Security Council, where the other countries did not allow the Russian propaganda to spread. She did not recall that within year 2022 there were only 15 families that agreed to adopt Ukrainian kids. There was nothing to boast about. She just omitted it. But those are all the evidences that were properly documented. Everything will be handed over to the International Criminal Court. My organization, the Regional Center for Human Rights, we prepared back in October 2022 communication to International Criminal Court as to the presence of the indicators of crime of genocide in activities of Lvova Belova. We see the potential that in future other activities aimed at forced relocation of Ukrainian kids, all those activities will be qualified as a crime of genocide. And the statement of Karim Khan, the prosecutor of ICC, gives us reasons to assume that this requalification is possible. Besides, we prepare other communication to International Criminal Court because deportation and forced relocation is yet another side of the coin, that Russian Federation illegally, unreasonably refuses to return those kids to their homeland in compliance to Geneva Convention and Additional Protocol 1. This is the article in Additional Protocol 1 was adopted by the consensus, so no country, including Soviet Union back then, did not think that article was unimportant. So this is why this is unreasonable delay of repatriation of those kids. It's not delay, in fact. Those are the purposeful actions to make this repatriation impossible. This is the serious violation of Geneva Convention, the violation of international humanitarian law, and it can be regarded as the war crime. There was relevant practice in ICC with the case of Yugoslavia. There are certain principles on the level of United Nations organization. There are relevant documents of the International Court of United Nations, and we see all prospects to prove that Maria Lvova Belova, in her arrest warrant, it's written not only deportation but also refused to repatriate the children as an additional war crime. This is the direction we're going to move on. And all the horrors that Mr. Mykola already mentioned that accompany the process of return, that results in deaths of people and children just get another trauma, they cannot be qualified as additional violations of human rights. It's not only a work of the International Criminal Court but also the Committee of United Nations for Human Rights. Those children, they remain in legal vacuum. Russian Federation is not a member of European Council and European Court for Human Rights. Russia did not sign the faculty protocol for the Convention of Human Rights, and there is the committee, United Nations Committee on Human Rights, and this is where we will submit about those delays, about those 15 hours interrogations based on what that grandmother was given, that certificate for non-leaving the country, to sign. What is the reasoning? We have to understand that every story has a whole bunch of violations of international law that cannot be left unpunished. Mr. Mykola, and then we will proceed to Q&A session. We just wanted to add that we started working with the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights for identification of a number of children in Russian Federations. We expect that Russian Federation will tell us at least something about those children who are still left there. What Maria Lvova Belova said, 13 or 38 or 350, because according to the estimates of the Yale University, it was 43 institutions and 6,000 children. So it's times and times more of those children, but unfortunately for the time being we don't know what are those children, where do they come from. So all the children that we returned, they were telling us there are more and more children. And many such children, they don't know about whereabouts of their parents, whether they are in Ukraine or otherwise, or they are killed or they are ill. We don't know. We have to find those parents, but those are the real children who wait for months that someone would come to pick them up. And the evidences of those kids, some of them are 6 or 7 years old. They sit and cry and they wait for somebody to find their parents or relatives or other close ones. This is why we will continue our rescue mission. Nastya, please tell us now your story. Please tell us, what do you know, what was happening to you and how it was happening. On the 6th of October, we were taken to Crimea. We were promised we would stay there for 2 weeks. Then we spent 4 months there until I was picked up from there. In the camp, everything, first of all, was superficial. It looked like a regular camp. It looked like everything was normal. But after we spent 2 weeks there, and well, maybe a couple more days, some kind of disorder started. We were forced to learn Russian anthem and to sing it, and every week on a certain time we were forced to stand up and sing it, and for not singing it they told us we don't appreciate them enough. They were not looking for ways to get us back to our families. We were asking them to hire some buses to take us away from there. They could do that, but they just didn't want it. They said it's too expensive to order a bus. They said, let your parents come and pick you. They were feeding us, well, not so good. We had some bad eggs in the morning, and then in the evening we had some cereals without sugar or salt. Every evening we had discotheques or other events. Those events mostly had Russian songs. We were not allowed to speak Ukrainian. We were not allowed to demonstrate our Ukrainian identity in no way. We were bullied for that. We were told, you are fascists, go back to your During every event, the Crimean children were crying glory to Russia, and during those events they were telling us, you cannot do anything, go back to where you came from. So we were humiliated there. They forced us to study there according to the law. So children have to attend school starting from 4th grade to 9th grade, and from 9th grade and all the way up to the 3rd course of the institute you can sign some documents for to study at home. Everything was in Russian language. History was in Russian history basically. Well, I understand you're worrying, but well, after our press conference is over, you will be able to communicate. So we're ready to proceed to the questions from the floor. Please raise your hands if you have any questions. Please take the microphone. Ukrinform. Good afternoon. I'm having a question to Mr. Kuleba. Do we have any information regarding the number of Ukrainian children who ended up in Russia? How many of them were forwarded to Belarus? Do you have any information about that? No, unfortunately we don't have information regarding the number of children who are in Belarus. We've heard from the words of Maria Lvova-Belova that children were brought to Chechnya for re-education, and she tried to justify it. It's a normal practice. That why are you only talking about the military camps? It's not only military camps, those are the re-education camps. And I think that we will find children in Belarus too, but we don't know even the number of the kids who are currently in Russian Federation. This is why we try to address Russia please comply with your obligations under the agreements you signed, because this information is closed. Even the fact that in summer they formally published in the website of Krasnodar region the service for children and families. There are thousands of children being adopted by foster families. All that information was cleared, and now they clearly understand that for publishing that information it is a war crime and it would entail liability. So finding any information now is very difficult, whether about Russia or Belarus. So this is why we're looking for any communications about whereabouts of those children. Where are they? In which parts of Russian Federation? I cannot tell you from where, but I'm getting messages from different parts of Russia that Ukrainian children are being proposed for adoption. I'm getting those messages. So children ask what can be done about it, how can this be prevented. We don't have opportunity to get those children back now, but even last year on the 30th of May, almost a year ago, Maria Lvova Belova, she addressed Putin to sign relevant laws, and on May 30 Putin signed 2 laws on facilitation of provision of Russian citizenship for Ukrainian kids and facilitation of the adoption procedure. So now finding adopted Ukrainian kids is quite difficult, because first they are given Russian citizenship and then they are being adopted as Russian children. So the fact that they say we don't adopt Ukrainian children, it's true, that's true. They don't adopt citizens of Ukraine. First they give them Russian citizenship and only then they adopt Russian citizens, Russian kids. There are more questions.
My question is, we're hearing from parents that they were pressured by their school administrators, sometimes by teachers, to send their children to these camps. Are there collaborators on the Ukrainian side that need to be pursued, that are being pursued, and where are they?
Дякую за запитання. Насправді, да, технологія, я вже трошки згадував про цю.
Yes, really, I already mentioned this technology. When Russians captured some territories, the first thing they were doing, they were looking for people who agreed to cooperate with them. They could be the school administration, school directors in different bodies, different authorities, government institutions. They were bought for idea, for salary, for food, and then according to the evidence of those parents or their children, those were the very directors of the schools who were making calls to the parents, and in a number of ways they were trying to persuade, to encourage, depending on what were those parents. So the children of the collaborationists were the first ones to go to those camps. That was the test of loyalty. If you are prepared to serve us, prove it by sending your child to the camps. So those children were sent, and then they came back and they said to the other kids, like, look, we came back, everything is fine, you can go there, we were there, those are normal camps. This is how they acted. But again, according to the evidences of the children and of the parents, when they were sending kids in September and October, it's no summer camps, it's fall already. And after they left those children there, the parents started addressing them, so please get our children back. They said we will get them back later. And when Ukrainian army deoccupied those territories, those collaborationists, they fled. They fled to the occupied territories or to Russian Federation.
Anyone been arrested?
From whom?
Among Ukrainian collaborators, alleged Ukrainian collaborators, have any been arrested?
Yeah, we we arrested that one who stays in their occupied territories. But maybe 99% of them were fleeing to abroad, to Russia Federation or occupied territories.
Чи є ще питання? Якщо
Are there any more questions? If we don't have any more questions on the floor, my last question is, who of the international organizations who can help Ukraine solve this issue specifically? Who should do what? And another question, what is the procedure for the parents? Whom to call? What to do? How to document everything? If you can give those answers, I will ask the girls to disclose the information about that, but we're having children here and I want them to answer the question, do you know your teachers who were inviting you to the camps and where are they now? Can you answer that question? A microphone, please. Is the answer to the previous question? Yes. Well, in my case, I had the informatics teacher. She kind of became a director on behalf of Russians. I don't know whether she went herself, but she became a director of the school. So I come to pick up the study books, and my class teacher, she tells me to go pick up the books, and there is this director, Tamara Rashevska. She says there will be no Ukrainian books. And class teacher, she said, don't take any books, just turn around and leave. I come back home, I tell it to your mother, and I submitted the application about the remote training. So where's this teacher now? She's now in the left bank in Skadovsk, in the left bank of Kherson region. So before liberation, she fled to the occupied territory, right? Nastya, do you know where the whereabouts of the teacher who invited you? It was Galina Ivanovna. She is in Henichsk now. She is a collaborationist, for what I remember, and she fled when the liberation has begun, and her invitation was like this. When I was entering, I started studying, so she invited my mother. She said, I need your mother, let her sign some documents. So she's coming and she says, there is a proposal for your kid to go to a recreation camp for 2 weeks. Don't get worried, there is no war going on there. Everything will be all right. There will be meals there. They will have some lessons there. My mother said that she cannot go. She started refusing it, but the teacher started psychologically pressing on my mother. She was asked whether you have any documents with you, like passport or anything. She said, no, I don't. So we found a picture from the passport, and she's just taken some superficial details. It was kind of forged document because it was really unnecessary. So she signed that paperwork, and we were given that paperwork. And when we were looking for the accompanying person, we were told that there is no one to accompany us. You have some like indefinite status here. Well, I don't know. I don't know how to say it properly. Was it false or forged or... Well, anyway, this teacher is in Henichsk now, and she keeps teaching there. Well, and as to the question that I asked, who and how can help Ukraine now? So one of the questions that you asked about Ukraine is about where the parents should apply in such cases, in cases of forced deportation of Ukrainian kids. There is Security Service of Ukraine, and this category of crimes is being investigated by them for, the pre-court investigation. So with the relatives should apply to the investigations office of the Security Service of Ukraine. There will be primary interrogation performed by them if there are close relatives in Ukrainian territory, in the territory under Ukrainian government control. Also, you can apply to the National Information Bureau, who adds all the details to the database regarding the people involved. They are authorized by international humanitarian law for communication through International Committee of Red Cross with the occupier state. They communicate in regard of all the citizens of Ukraine who end up as the victims of the armed conflict. So the mechanism of engagement of the third countries which are capable of helping Ukraine in resolution of those issues, this matter may be described better by Kateryna. Well, I'm the recommendation letter. The United Nations organization at the level of the General Assembly should adopt relevant resolution on necessity of prompt repatriation of Ukrainian children. The Special Commissioner for Children's Rights with the United Nations organization should open their eyes and see hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children deported to Russian Federation, and to make relevant investigation and submit the results to Secretary General. At the European level, the European Council should adopt relevant resolution with a clear requirement, not only identification but also repatriation of Ukrainian children and assistance by the third countries in this process, because Russia and Ukraine, I surmise, would not be able to communicate directly. Again, ICRC should submit a request to Russian Federation by themselves with requirements of the list of children, and Maria Lvova Belova, who said she's ready to return the children, she would not be able to confirm that she is really ready, because there will be no single response from Russian Federation to the International Committee of Red Cross. On the level of European Union, we need assistance to the mechanism of repatriation and rehabilitation and reintegration. You've heard about the horrors that the children went through, and I don't have to emphasize the necessity of such mechanism. And on the level of this mechanism that the experts are already appointed in, there is some mysterious procedure. The experts, somehow they don't have some specific application. We don't know what are those people, but the Moscow mechanism should seek way to get to the institutions where the children are being kept. So not only children evidence the absence of linens and the presence of rats and cockroaches, but also the experts of OSCE that Russian authorities rely on so heavily, so that they understand what is their problem and what lists are really required from them. If there is anything to add, please. For what I remember regarding the address during the press conference of Lvova Belova, there was a phrase that they addressed the ICRC with a request to provide assistance in searching for the children who are currently located in European Union. So why only this limitation? As Mykola said, why didn't they just put together the comprehensive list for identification of all those children that they relocated from occupied territories, the territories which were under control of Russian Federation? Why did they move them to Russian Federation? There were no such lists until this very moment, and this is the evidence that they cannot identify all the children, and for what they understand, there is lack of understanding even inside of their country what children's camps those children ended up in what conditions, what is the number of those children. If it would have been clearly identified, there would be no problem with the figures that exist for the time being in different platforms that state about those figures. Well, basically that's it. Well, Russia and bureaucracy are antonyms. Well, there are more organizations other than ICRC. It's UNICEF who deals with the matters of children. It's another humanitarian organization which has access to Russian Federation, and they can check the compliance of Russia with all their requirements and regulations. Well, Russia ousted UNICEF about 6 to 7 years ago. Well, I want to add that there is a Save Ukraine hotline. You can see it on this poster. And this is the hotline where we get the information about the children who were deported to Russian Federation and to Crimea. And this is when we, after what we start working, those children who were evidences of their war crimes, they were passing the information to us. We have another question and then we will wrap up. Well, first let's give the microphone to Nastya and then the question and then we wrap up. I would like to say that they promised us, they never complied with their promises. They said we would be living in good conditions, we would have good food, good meals. We came there were cockroaches in our lockers, in our dining facility. The food was abhorrent. We were sleeping in stinky old pillows and linens. We were humiliated. I was beaten. Other children were beaten. Also recently there was an interview by Vitas. He was telling about Astakov, who was beating children with sticks. He was locking children in cellars for 4 hours. He was having conversations with them about Ukrainians being fascists, being bad. He told about those military activities. They just did not fulfill their promises, and they were psychologically, morally pressing on the parents to let us go to those camps because there was no other choice. You stay in the city which is being bombarded and you're scared, you're afraid of your life, you're afraid that there will be incoming on that very building you're sitting in, and this is how we were sent there under that pressure. So the last question and we're wrapping up.
Question is for Mr. Kuleba. Can you provide some details on how the process of getting these kids back to Ukraine work? I mean, are there still some diplomatic channels? How do you negotiate their return? With who, for how long?
Yeah, thank you. I am civil servant. Вибачте, я громадський діяч. Зараз
I'm a civil servant for the time being, and obviously we don't use any diplomatic channels. We don't cooperate with the authorities of Russian Federation. We started working with the office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmitro Lubinets, who has some negotiations with the opposite side, but we are ready to undertake only the logistic procedures, the documents, the transportation, the delivery, the accommodation of children and families. Just like today, these children with their parents, they live in the centers of hope and recuperation. Then there is a 3-month program for the families of the kids who were affected by the war to recover their forces, to reintegrate into education process, to recuperate their psychological, mental health, and we help them to adapt in the new place of residence. In response to your question, no, we don't have any official agreements. We do everything, we fulfill those rescue missions all by ourselves. We cooperate with the Security Service of Ukraine on documenting crimes, on acquisition of information, and also with the Commissioner of the Parliament for Human Rights. So we want to appreciate your presence here, the participation of all the speakers. There will be 31 more Ukrainian kids coming. And just to summarize it, Mr. Vasil, I want to say a couple of words. I'm being asked frequently, what is the purpose of the Russians? And why do they send children to the camps? So these children present here, they say that yeah, from the very beginning it was kind of normal, but then the situation started becoming horrific. Some children say, well, it was fun, it was a camp, but then all the children were saying the same thing. They were afraid they would not be brought back to Ukraine. So main purpose of Russia is to destroy Ukraine, eradicate Ukrainian identity, to capture all of the territory of Ukraine and make it a part of Russian Empire. So with that purpose, it makes no difference to them whether Ukrainians flee abroad or they deport Ukrainians to Russian Federation and get them brainwashed. Because I was saying that there's a lot of young people who were in Crimea and Donbass many years ago, that they are now in the ranks of Russian army fighting Ukraine, or whether they intimidate them and to force them become collaborationists. Everything works for them. The only thing that doesn't work for them is when somebody tries to resist. And they want to counter their plans. They want to counteract the plans of Kremlin to capture Ukraine. This is whom they call Nazis, those who fight for freedom, fight for standing their rights to be Ukrainian. For them, we are Nazis. But it doesn't make a difference to us. We will win, we will take over, and we will get all of our children back to Ukraine. Well, on this optimistic note and with the faith in the armed forces of Ukraine, we're wrapping up. Media Center will continue its operation on Monday. See you shortly.